Professor Dale Willows of the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto conducted some research studies to compare learning progress using a systematic phonics approach against current teaching practice in a number of schools in Canada.
Although it's been thought for a long time that it's very important in the early stages that children learn how our alphabetic system works, now research evidence has shown very clearly that children must learn phonemic awareness, they develop sensitivity to the sounds in our language, and they must learn how those sounds hook onto those little squibbles we call letters in the early stages, and they need to do that systematically. I wanted to find out whether there may be a program around that would be fun for teachers to use and help children develop these skills. And I came across the Jolly Phonics program, and together with two of my doctoral students, Karen Sumbler and John Morgan, I undertook a series of studies to investigate the effectiveness of Jolly Phonics in the early stages of literacy development when children are in the age range from 4 to 6. There were two studies. The first study involved senior kindergarten and grade 1. That's involving children who are 5 and 6 years of age. And we compared those with control classes in equivalent areas. There were over 500 children involved. And what's shown here are the results, first with the children who are 6 years of age, and these are on a standardized reading and spelling measure that's widely used. And what these results show, in the red, the results are shown for the children who were in the classrooms that did not have the Jolly Phonics program. And in the green are those children who did have the program. And the results are highly significant, both in terms of reading on a test of word recognition and on spelling, where children have words dictated and they just have to spell them. Clearly, the program was very effective and better than the children who did not have it. This slide shows that the 5-year-olds performed in essentially the same way as the 6-year-olds did, that they were better at both reading and spelling. The spelling we thought was worth investigating further, because as we looked at the children's spelling, what we saw was that although the children didn't spell all of the words correctly, they made very good what we call phonemic approximations. They represented the sounds that are in words very well. So if you look at this list, and, in, him, make, cook, it's supposed to be cook, the child put cooking, and then the next word is must, and the next one's enter. Light, reach, circle, explain, etc. And what the children did was spell words the way they sound, despite the fact that they're not correct spellings. And as we looked at the performance of children on this test, we saw that it's really worthwhile looking at how good their spelling is in terms of phonemic approximations. When we compared the performance of the experimental children, those children with the Jolly Phonics program, to the control children, what we saw is that the children who didn't have the program, when we asked them to write words, they might either just write single letters that might or might not be in the word, or they'd write strings of letters that didn't represent the sounds in words or anything, and often these were capital letters rather than lowercase letters. And this is my favorite of the bunch here. This child obviously worked very hard to represent the spelling, but as you can see, there are curly cues and all kinds of things that aren't even real letters. We quantified the number of children who represented the sounds in words accurately, and this graph shows the performance of the control children and the children who had the Jolly Phonics program. The control children are represented in black, and as we look across the words and, in, him, make, etc., the words that were in the test, what we see is that for the control children, although they could, about a fifth of them could represent the spellings of the first 5 words, they couldn't represent the spellings of other words, and actually what that shows is that they knew how to spell those first words, but when they came to other words, they spelled them quite inaccurately. Because these findings were so compelling, we decided that we should look even earlier. These were involving children who are 5. In our schools, we have many children who start at 4 in what we call junior kindergarten. And many of those children are coming from homes where there aren't very many books, or many of them are also coming from homes where they don't speak English as their first language. But as we all know, when children are first learning their language, if there are 2 languages in the home, they often pick up the second language just as quickly as the first, and they also pick up the sounds and the accent of that second language, because when they're very young, they're in a natural stage of oral language development, and the sounds of the language are something that their brain is all tuned up to pick up. So we thought it was really worthwhile to look at children when they were in this young stage to see whether they would pick up the sounds of English better as a result of having been in a program that focuses on those sounds at an early stage. So we designed a study, and that was the second study in the series that involved over 200 children. These were children who had an average age of 4. We also had control comparisons in classrooms that didn't use the program. And half of the children came from other language backgrounds, so they were coming to school with very little language in English. They may have a very rich first language, but didn't happen to be English. And so we made a contrast between the effectiveness of the program for children whose first language was English or some other language. This slide shows how well children learned the letter sound patterns that were being taught in the program. The red shows the performance of children who had English as their first language, and the blue shows the performance of children who had English as their second language. And on the left is the performance of children who were in the control condition, and on the right is the performance of children who were in the Jolly Phonics program. What this basically shows is that the children who were in the program learned what they were taught. They learned the letter sound patterns that the program was designed to teach. And what we found so exciting was that the children who had English as their second language learned them just as well as those who had English as their first language, despite the fact that they were 4 years of age and had relatively little English. We then went on to look at the spellings of these 4-year-olds, and many 4-year-olds don't spell at all, but the children who went through this study, if they had the Jolly Phonics program, in fact, they were able to spell some words correctly, but what was especially interesting is if they didn't spell them correctly, did they make use of those letter sound patterns that they'd been taught and try to represent them phonemically accurately? And what these bars show is that this is how good was their spelling in terms of phonemic approximations. On the left, the control performance shows you that these children didn't have good phonemic approximations, and on the right, Jolly Phonics performance was very good. And once again, those children for whom English was their second language did just as well, in fact, in this case, slightly better, although not significantly better, in terms of the phonemic accuracy of their spelling. Looking at the graphs from this study actually gets rather boring, and it gets rather boring because they all look the same. Basically, what they show in this graph shows you the children's recognition of words, and what the graph shows is that children who had the program were able to use those tools they had and figure out words. Either they recognized them by sight, or in many cases they sounded them out. And children who did not have the program weren't able to do that. And throughout, children who had English as their second language were able to do this just as well as those children for whom English was their first language. One finding that I found particularly fascinating is represented in this graph. We wanted to find out whether children who had the program would be better at discriminating between sounds of the language. That means when you say ah, I, and say to the child, is that the same or different? That whether they recognize. And so you'd say ah, I, d. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different, and they need to just say same or different. What this graph shows is that for children who had English as their first language, represented in red here, they're pretty good at this task. It's a very easy task, just are these same or different? For children who had English as their second language, if they were in the control condition, they didn't do very well in this. They made some errors. If they were in the Jolly Phonics program, we seem to have tuned their ears so that they could hear differences between sounds that they couldn't hear under the without that experience. And so what it says to me is probably these sounds aren't in their first language, and when they went through the program, they paid more attention to sounds and became better at hearing the sounds in English. To see what this all means in terms of how children are performing in the classroom, I have a writing sample that is fairly characteristic of what we found, and that is that if you look at this, and anybody who's familiar with Toronto will recognize that tower there. I went to the CN Tower, and I went in the round part, and it go around, and I got kind of dizzy. That kind of spelling really communicates children are using the tools that they have acquired through the program. And I have another example here. This is from a 4-year-old. And again, you know that a child has never seen the word tulips spelled that way. The child is simply using the sounds that are in the word, and daffodils. And I like to ride my bike. That's one of my favorites. So to sum up, what I think the study showed is that children at 6 and at 5 can learn letter sound patterns, apply these in reading and writing very well, and also that children as young as 4, even if they don't speak much English, can learn letter sound patterns, develop phonemic awareness, and make use of what they have learned in reading and writing. And I think that the thing that I've really learned from doing this study is that we need to raise our expectations. I really didn't expect that 4-year-olds, and especially those that don't speak very much English, could do this, and they in fact did it very well.